All the way from Poland, we have Maciej Treder to talk us about Angular Universal.
Thanks you for having me here. Nice to meet you all. My name is Maciej Treder. This is my handle. You can find me on all of those social networks which I listed here. So Twitter, GitLab, Medium, whatever you would like to use, just type this and you will find me. I am from Krakow, from Poland. It's in southern Poland. On my daily basis, I am working in Akamai technologies. I am a senior software development engineer, and I'm working with Angular on my after hours. I am more Angular passionate than the Angular professional. Moreover, I am contributing to open source and writing publications mostly about JavaScript, web technologies, and so on. If someone don't know Akamai, it's a United States company. The headquarters are in Cambridge, in Massachusetts. What we are doing on our daily basis, we are trying our best to make internet faster and more secure for our customers, and we serve something like up to 15 to 30% of the whole internet traffic. The outline for today would be about the ASPA pitfall. Later on, I would like to speak about the server-side rendering and the pitfalls which are coming with server-side rendering. So we will cover how to differentiate the code run on the server and the one run on the browser. Later on, how to optimize the API calls, which are, or how to it would be better to say how to optimize the calls to the API from the Angular perspective, where we can deploy finally an alternative for the server-side rendering, which is a pre-rendering. Then I plan to make a small break and we will go on to the second part, which would be the live coding. Everything I'm going to indicate with the small color at the bottom, so if someone will get lost, you can still find yourself where we are in the presentation. More informations to be said is that I'm going to share with you a couple links and QR codes, so if you would like to follow up the information after all, just keep your phone in the ready position to scan QR codes. So let's start finally after this long introduction. What are you doing when your application is ready and you are going to deploy to production? You are in this state that you are tested and you think that everything is good. You run the ng build a couple times, you tested the ahead of time compilation. So you are adding just the production flag to minify your application, to make a tree shake, and upload it to the static hosting. Comparing the ng build to production, to the ng build with production flag, it's boost your app up, so you think that you are ready to go, your customer would be happy with that, and everything is perfect. But there is one problem which comes at this moment, and the problem with all of the single-page applications, this is not only the Angular thing. The problem lays here in the server configuration. This is the example configuration for the Apache. So what you are doing, you are just routing every request which are coming to the server to one particular file, to one particular path, which in our case is just index.html. Unfortunately, that leads us to the situation whenever someone hits, and it doesn't matter if he will go with get or he will go with get another page, you will ship to this person exactly same HTML and exactly same JavaScript. Everything is bootstrapped on the browser side, and this is the place where the content is rendered. So for the content delivery networks like Akamai, for SEO crawlers, for the prefetching systems, your website is just empty. The only thing which those machines can see is that in this case JavaScript is necessary to work with this. So we have nothing to cache, we have nothing to place to the search engine results, and so on. The Angular team was probably thinking a lot about, because Angular is Google technology, so they for sure are thinking about search engine optimization. So they, for sure, it took them a while to think about that and solve this problem. And as you know, Angular is a JavaScript framework. So it can be run on any device or any environment which supports the JavaScript. So idea about SSR is to move the Angular logic or duplicate the Angular logic on the Node.js application server. So now whenever user is trying to get another page within your application, he get exactly the view which is dedicated for this particular road, for this particular request. Thanks to that, web crawlers and content delivery networks sees much richer output. So company like I am working for have something to cache on our servers. Google has something to take a look inside. Facebook has something to display to the users if you are sharing the link to the application. So for example, here you can see the stuff which is prefetched by Facebook when I was sharing the link to one of my projects. Comparing the universal to production, the application, as you can see, works in quite similar manner. There are no huge differences here. Same regarding the compute time used on the browser side. The difference here is that for the application used with the production flag, whenever the user is going to it and how the browsers are working. They first load HTML, then renders it. So this is the moment when user sees that page is loading, something is loading, please wait for JavaScript. JavaScript is bootstrapped after the HTML is loaded and rendered. And that's the moment when the first meaningful paint with our content is displayed to the user. With SSR, the loading HTML process took a little bit more because we need the time on the Node.js to render the view, but we are bringing the first meaningful paint immediately after the HTML is rendered by the browser. What's going on later is that JavaScript engine is run. The interactive view of the page is rendered, and it's just overlapped with the static one from the generated HTML. So how to start working with Universal? Super simple. There are two paths, and both are okay in my opinion. Sometime in the past I was more recommending the ng toolkit way because the official guide was just a boilerplate built up on Webpack, but nowadays Angular team have prepared the schematics as well for us. So we have a schematics from the Angular team, the official ones. If you will run this command in your existing Angular project, it will create for you those files which are listed here, and I'm going to quickly go through the most important ones. So first of all, it will create the app server module. That will be an entry point for the Angular run it on the server. This module will import the app module, which is the entry point for the browser code. So everything what is inside the server and is specific for server will override what is inside the app module. And this is the official guide. What I strongly recommend you to do, if you will use the official schematic, is to create the app browser module. So you will have two separate entry points, completely not connected, so you can keep the browser-specific imports separate from the server-specific import. In my opinion, for me particularly, it's much more readable than overriding something. If you will go on with the ng toolkit universal, which is the enhancement for the traditional schematics, it's just adding a couple stuff on top of it. You will get similar list of files. Both of those schematics under the hood will produce for you also the server TS file, which is the Express application executed inside the Node.js. So what we have here, first of all, the Node.js must be set. So we are creating it here. We are telling it that we are going to use the ng Express engine as an HTML render for rendering the views. And to the ng Express engine, we need to pass the app server module, so that entry point for the Angular on the server side, and lazy module map. If you have lazy loaded routes in your application, you need to explicitly tell Angular on the server side what are those roads are. Apart of that, inside server TS, the last thing which we need to do, or sorry, not the last, the second thing is to make the configuration similar to what you saw at the beginning. So we are pointing just every request, so this is why we have a wildcard here, to be rendered with the view engine which we just set, so the ng Universal Express. Later on, what is added by the schematics is pointing all of the static files, so the CSS, HTMLs, fonts, images, and so on, to host them from the browser build. And we are ready to go, just by typing 2 commands, or in fact 3, because first we added schematics, which created for us all of those files which I showed you, and we are just running build prod for production and server to serve file from localhost. And that's how you can get this part of job to be done. This is the QR code under which you can find the ng Toolkit project, which we are going to cover as well a little bit. And what the ng Toolkit does, and the official schematics does not, it's try to address some pitfalls in Angular Universal. So what are the pitfalls? The first one is the browser versus server. So those two are different environments. Both of them are running JavaScript, but those, the global environment, the global variables and functions which you can use in those environments are slightly different. So on the browser, for example, you have a window object, which of course is representing the browser window. So on the server side, you doesn't have any window, so the server side lacks of that. But server-side JavaScript has also the objects which are represented there and are not represented on the browser, like file system or access to the HTTP request. In the browser, you cannot access the file system from the JavaScript level. This is the security thing. You can break your application with just one line of code regarding the server-side rendering part. And because there is no compilation, in fact, TypeScript is just translated to the JavaScript. It's not compilated. You won't get the compilation issues. So everything will run smoothly when you will run the tsc command. But this small line of code on your server side will raise an error that there is no window object here. So you just won't generate the HTML. How you can work around that and work with this problem? Because sometimes it would be useful to have information about what language is the visitor using. Maybe you want to display some translations and so on. So Angular team provide us with 2 helper methods for checking that. One is called isPlatformBrowser, the other one is platform-server. And to use them, you need to inject, and this is what is missing here. In constructor, we are injecting the platform ID and keep it under platform ID. And then together with the isPlatformServer or isPlatformBrowser, you can determine where your code is executed. So now I can determine that I am on the server side and I don't have the window object here. So the different logic should be applied. And the technique to work with the window, to navigator, file system, etc., is to use the wrapper service, which is utilizing the is-platform server, is-platform browser helper methods. So what wrapper service, which is in the NG toolkit, could do for you? So first of all, it is using the request object, which you can take a look like that under code similar to this one, and the request object is available only on the platform. As I said, there is no request on the browser, and if you would run this code on your server, you would see an output which is representing on what host the application is run at, or all of the settings of the browser, all of the headers which has been sent to the server, including the language set on the browser, on the machine. So I can write the service, which is first of all determining where we are, as we said. It's giving me the window variable here, which is representing this window, and depending on where we are, if I am on the server, I am creating the window mock, where I am feeding it in the language section with the language from the header. And if I am on the browser, I am just keeping the regular window object under my private variable. Thanks to that, I can change this console log inside ng-on init to just something like this, using the wrapper service. And now my code won't be break on the server side. This is what is done by ng toolkit. If you won't use the ng add, just npm install. If you would like to get this service, you would need to import it inside your app module. Moreover, regarding the running code on server or browser, the other use case which I have for you is the ngx translate. This is a project for providing the internationalization of Angular applications. There is multiple way of using this module. One of them is using the translate pipe inside your HTML templates. Let's say I have the hello, which I want to translate, or welcome to, which I want to translate, and in Greek. I hope that this is a correct translation. I don't know Greek, so I just use translator. Whenever the local settings of the browser is Greek, I don't want to display it in English, but in your language. So how this would work with the server side? So because on the server side initially there is no support for window, etc., we would render, if we won't handle that, we would render the view in English, send it to the browser, and then probably browser will make an HTTP request for the Greek translations. If we will implement the handling the user language, we can use the server-side rendering to render the view in the Greek language, but maybe it doesn't make sense to perform an HTTP call for the translation files, because on this particular case, they are kept on the same machine as the application is running. So, for the browser side, we are going to implement the loader of the translations, which is provided by the library developer, and it is using the HTTP connection. But for the server side, what we can do is to create the equivalent of this, which will load the translations from the local file system. So basing on the past parameter language, we are just creating an observable here, which is looking for the file inside our internationalization. So this is where translation are kept with the given language JSON file. And finally, inside the component, inside any component, you can use it together, of course, with the service which we described just a couple slides before. We are ready to use the translate service and provide information what is the language for which we are looking for. If you would like, again, to follow this offline, I got an article for that. This is the link, and this is the QR code which you can scan. So under this publication, you can find a deep overview of the wrapper service for the server browser objects, and also the use case which I showed you, so the translating with the Angular Universal. API optimization, okay, it's not the second pitfall, but the fourth part of the talk, but it's also about pitfalls. How many of you knows this abbreviation? Everyone. How many of you know the dry C? Nobody, because I invented that. So let's think about now a small code snippet like this one. So here, what Angular does, whenever the component is loaded inside the onInit, we are performing some REST call. Under the JSON placeholder, we have some, this is just an online available mockup for testing services, etc. What will be the flow for the server-side rendered application which have this component? First of all, the request comes to the Node.js in the point first. Then in the point 2, the Node.js executes the Angular. So Angular performs the call to the external API. On the point 3, we get the response from the API. That's the moment when we are ready to render the view. So we are rendering it and shipping it to the browser. Browser is rendering HTML. And as I said, later on, again, JavaScript comes to the action. The JavaScript engine is fired. So Angular application is fired one more time. And what it does, it's performed in the point 5, exactly same call to the exactly same API. And probably it will get exactly same response. Now the solution for that, and the idea which we would like to get, the solution which we would like to achieve, is to, in the point 3, so we have point first, in the point second, we made the call by Node.js and got the response. And what we want to get is in the point 3, pass not only the HTML and JavaScript, but also the information that some of the calls or all of the calls has been performed already, and there is no need to perform them again. So the browser won't make those calls. You can use the out-of-the-box solution, which is called the Transfer HTTP Cache module. It is provided by the Angular team. This module is doing exactly what I showed you on the 2 previous slides. Or you can write it on your own, something similar to that, because maybe you have some special needs. And what this module is using under the hood is that 2 things. The first one is a transfer state. The transfer state object, I would call it a dictionary or a map, the collection of values under the key which is string. You have the key which is string and the value which is often also string or stringified object, or you can store there whatever you would like to. The transfer state object provides the multiple methods. Most used by me are the 4 ones here. So I am getting the value, setting the value, checking if the value is in the dictionary, and removing the value from the dictionary. And again, we have 2 different modules, one for server, one for browser. So again, 2 entry points for the application. So this is the one thing which HTTP cache module is using. The another thing is the HTTP interceptor. How many of you are familiar with interceptors? So quickly, HTTP interceptor is just a way of manipulating the HTTP call inside Angular application. If you are using it, probably you are, for example, adding an authorization header to calls or something similar. How does the HTTP interceptor looks like for the HTTP cache module? So this is what we have on the server side. For every request, if we are handling it, inside the transfer state, we are setting up the entry where the key is the URL of the request and the value is the response for that particular request. On the browser side, it's a little bit more complicated because first we are checking if this is a get method. If it's not get method, we are, so for example, post, put, etc. Something what shouldn't be executed on the server side, because post is modifying data on the server side, you should have only GET calls. If it's probably not done by the server side, we are just handling it like the regular one. But if it's a GET, we are looking for the stored response in the transfer state repository under the given key, which is the request URL. If we get this stored response, we are returning an observable with the value from the dictionary. And if there is no response, we are just handling it in the traditional way. The last thing which we need to do is to provide those interceptors respectively in the server side as in the browser side. Another thing about API calls is performance. What is the problem? The problem is that what server side is doing whenever the GET call is performed and the observable representing the HTTP call is somewhere in the application, the Angular universal waits for this observable to complete. If you won't do anything with that, your application will be as slow as the slowest API which it is calling. So the third parties are affecting your performance. The solution for that, which I propose, is to create the resolvers which are working different way on the server side and different way on the browser side. So we are starting with the implementing interface, later on we are checking where we are. If we are on the browser side, then we are just performing the GET call. I can wait for response till the end of the world. I don't care. But if I am on the server side, I don't want to wait till the end of the world. I want to wait some given amount of time. So I am creating an observable which is wrapping my GET request, and I'm going to pipe that, the response, with the watchdog observable, another one. And watchdog, you can set it up using the timer static method from the RxJS. And what timer will do for you, it will create an observable which emit, in this case, once after given amount of milliseconds, so after 500 milliseconds, which is half of the second. So we will wait for the response from this call just half of the second. If this time will elapse, we will display some nothing, or you can display some generating response that this call is going to be performed on the data, it will be loaded, or whatever you would like to. Finally, here we are subscribing to the watchdog, sending something different to the subject. Here I'm just pushing the value timeout and completing it. So this is how it would work for the slow API. The request comes to the server, then this is our Node.js server, and this is the external API. So our Node.js is making the call to the API. This is for the first one. So the API responds before half of the second, and the fully rendered view is shipped to the browser. The flow is done. What about the slow ones? So again, the request is performed by Node.js. We are hitting the watchdog after half of the second. So we are responding with the partially rendered view because we lack that information. But the call is performed again on the server side because it's not in the transfer state repository, transfer state dictionary. So whenever Angular is bootstrapped, one more time, this call is performed. If you would like to follow this case offline, this is the link, and this is the QR code. So we have Angular universal application, is API optimized, it's doesn't have pitfalls with the browser, server, stuff, etc. But that runs into one more trouble, because till now you could use the static hosting like Amazon S3 or any traditional hosting. What Angular universal needs, it's some compute resource to run Node.js. And maybe you don't want to run the EC2 container or another another costly environment. What you can do is use the serverless framework, or by some people that is called function as a service. You could know it as the AWS Lambda or IBM OpenWhisk, I guess, Google Cloud Functions, etc., etc., etc. This is a really great thing. It's an event-driven environment. So whenever nothing is going on the machine, when you have no traffic on your service, then the machine is just turned off and it's fired on when new request comes. So this is a cheap alternative on which you can deploy your Angular Universal as well. And if you would like to do that, here you can find an article which is showing you step by step how to handle that with the Amazon Web Services, so AWS Lambda. You can as well use ng Toolkit. And the final thing, the alternative for the SSR. So let's say that I want to be SEO, but I don't want to go with serverless or EC2 container or any other instance of computing machine. And what you can do is pre-rendering. And this is the technique of visiting each of links of the application at the compilation time and generating the HTML on your machine, on the build machine, on the continuous integration machine, and later on serve those generated file as a regular website static one. You can try the boilerplate which is here, or you can run the ng Toolkit Universal. This is the thing which is not included in the official schematics, so this is one of those enhancements from the ng Toolkit, that it will install for you the script which will pre-render your application after running this command. Comparing and summarizing this part, comparing the ng build production to pre-render and to server side. So from the SEO purpose, ng build prod is completely not SEO friendly. Pre-rendering and server-side rendering, for sure they are. The difference between those two is that external calls for the APIs which are changing often, so for example external calling the stock price or weather, etc., it doesn't make sense from the pre-render, because you will just mock for the event which happens on the compilation time. From the performance perspective, all of them are quite fast. From my experience, the pre-render is just a performance beast. It's working fast as hell. Additional backend logic. So what you can do with pre-render and you can do with server-side rendering, and this is what I'm going to cover in the second part after the break, that with the server-side rendering you can apply some additional logic which is maybe not really about Angular but about some side effects. You will see that, and I hope that you will find it interesting. And finally, the difficulty. So for sure, running the ng build prod is super simple. You are just typing the different comments. The two other solutions can be found as difficult ones, but I hope and I think that after today it will be as easy for you as the first one. So the case study, as I said, Universal, it's not only for server-side rendering, you can do also the site actions. During the break, one person asked me about the database calls, so I'm going to show you something similar to that. What the case study is that I have for you the project, which includes the protected path. And protected path, it's under the authorization guard. Whenever user is not authorized, he is directed to the login page. So this is the part which is done on the Node.js. So on the server side, the login page is rendered, and this is what is shipped to you if you are not authenticated. And Later on, if you are going to authenticate with the browser, then the browser is calling the endpoint on the backend, which is called auth login, and we have two-factor authorization. So if you will authenticate yourself correctly with username and password, then the application is calling the second factor provider. On this case, it will be the Twilio Authy. So it is using something what is called Authy ID. This is the API key to authorize the backend application. So once the request for the second factor will be passed to Authy, then Authy is calling the mobile device to authorize and sending back the ID of this particular request for the second factor. And what we want to do from the Angular side is to call the backend endpoint auth status with this ID to check if the second factor has been authorized or not. So this is the project which we are going to start about. This is our start point. What I want to show you today is the implementation of the remembered user. So I would like to add to this the functionality of the checkbox where you can click that you want yourself to be remembered by the system. And whenever you are a remembered person and your session timed out or something like that, so you are not authorized and not authenticated, you will be still directed to the login page, but I want the backend, the Node.js, immediately use the authentication ID, your user ID from the cookie, and basing on the user ID, the Node.js will send the request to the Authy during the rendering the view. So this information about the UID of the second factor request should be passed together with the rendered HTML. So it will be something similar to the HTTP cache module. We are going to use the transfer state for that, and using that ID, then the browser can immediately pull the information about the status and if we are authenticated and authorized to use the application. So that's the idea. Okay, so the project is here. It should be running. Let me go to the code. The one thing which we need to do here is first to zoom the... is it visible now? Perfect. So we need to zoom it. Another thing is that we need to get our application API key and the user ID from the Twilio. So inside the dashboard, I'm going to the Authy product, which is one of the Twilios. I have already set up an application for today, so it's called Angular Athens, of course. Here I am taking the API key. This is needed for the server TS. So inside my server TS file, I'm going to place my production API key. That's the first thing which is hard-coded. The another thing which you are going to hard-code is the Authy ID. On the regular basis, this endpoint, as you can see, this is not an Angular endpoint. The Angular application is directed here. So this is where the Angular Universal is working on. The other endpoints like auth login, which is accepting post, the status, this is checking the authentication with the Authy, and the endpoint which is checking if you are logged in. Those are not Angular application endpoints, those are backend endpoints. So another thing which we are going to mock and hard code is the Authy ID. On the production application, that would be probably retrieved from the database or something like that, as well as we have hard coded the user, which is foo and password bar. So let me grab that one user ID from the console, which is here, and now the application should be ready to compile and should running. Here you can see the screen of my mobile, so that's the place where I should get the push notification. So it says that it is up and running, listening on localhost. Let me navigate there. Okay, it's asking for my user ID and password, so I'm going with foo bar, hitting login. It's waiting for the second factor, which is appearing here. So I'm going to authenticate, and now I'm redirected to the protected page. Yeah, so this is what we are expecting. So let's start implementing the remembered user flow. So the first things first, we are going with the auth service as the first place, because this is the service which is used to performing calls to the backend, and we need to adjust one of these calls. So we will replace the auth command with the new one. First troubles, never ever run live coding again. Okay, it's replacing two methods. So what we are doing here is adding the new parameter to the auth, because we want to give user an ability to be remembered. And the second thing is refactor the method which is handling the second factor. And as well, we want to have this information if user checked the checkbox or not. And basing on that information, if user want to be remembered, if yes, then we are sending the additional header to the backend. So the backend will have an information that the cookie should be set up on the user end. And what we are going to do now is the implementation of a new implementation on the server side. So inside the server.ts, I need to add this logic which will set up the cookie for me. So what I'm going to change is this method, which is handling the status endpoint. So I have this second snippet here. I can get rid of that. And what we added is here we are looking for the remember header. If it is there and user is authenticated, I clicked the second factor request on my device. I can set up the cookie which is indicated that I am remembered, and this cookie, inside this cookie, we are keeping the information about the user ID. So what ID will be used for the further second factor authorization. And of course, this cookie is HTTP only, so the browser side JavaScript won't have access to it. So we are not open for any vulnerabilities and other malware attacks. So now we can add the checkbox inside our component, the component which is login page component. Remember me with the checkbox. Now I need to add the logic to work with that checkbox. So I'm going to the login page component. I'm going to change this field. So as you can see, if you will compare those two, there's just one new field here, which we added in the view. This is shouting at me that I am passing too low number of parameters. So I'm going to replace that with the new onSubmit, which is passing more parameters. One of those is the remember me or not remember me. And once the request for the second factor is done, we are putting out the information that we are waiting for second factor, subscribing for the response, and if the response is true, so the application has authorized, we are just passing going forward and passing our customer to the protected component. Now I'm ready to test if the cookie is working as we expect. So I'm going to rebuild the application. Okay, I have my checkbox. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to authorize the app. And now what I have here is first of all that super encrypted value which says that I am authenticated, and another cookie which says that I am remembered, which is host only, so it's not available in the JavaScript from the browser side. Okay, so we are ready to go on. So far, so good. Any questions? So we are ready to go the adding immediate second factor. So when my server will see that I have remembered cookie, it will send the request to the Authy that I want to be remembered. Let's start from the server TS. As you can see here, I have that API key, and this API key is utilized to make the request to the Authy and gives me back the ID of the request to the second factor. And I want to have this ID to use it with the transfer state. Because transfer state is available inside the Angular application, I need this API key in the Angular application. But I don't want to just place it there and hard code it there, because what the Angular Universal does, and what is the one great thing about Universal, and sometimes it could make a pain to you, is that you have a shared code base for the browser and for the server. So if I will hard code this in my Angular application, I will just give it to my users for free, because it will be in the bundle, so it will ship with the JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is to use the providers array here and pass this API key as a provider to the application, and inside my application determining where I am on the server and on the browser, I will look for the API for this key to perform the call to the second factor. So I'm going to replace this app engine call here with my fifth snippet. No, sixth one. So I'm providing here the API key using the value which I hard-coded here. As you remember, this is server TS, so this is the file which resides on the Node.js. It's not going to the browser. Once I have this, I can go to my authorization service, and inside my authorization service I need to add some imports. So first of all, as I said, we are going to use transfer state, so I'm going to import transfer state, the state key. This is the class which is representing the dictionary keys, and the helper method for creating the keys for the dictionary. Once I get that, I can add the method which will get the token from the cookie, the remembered token, or before that we will replace the constructor to inject the API key here. So we have this new entry which is injecting API key, and we have also injection for the transfer state. And now we can add the method which will retrieve the information about authenticated remembered user ID from the cookie. Basing on our user cookie, as you can see, we are using here, first of all, we are using the request object. We are checking if we have cookie, and if we are on the server, and if we have cookie. And if we have it, we are directly calling the API of Authy to get the information about the request ID for the second factor, pass it over our application. And where are we going to utilize this method is the login resolver. So I am going to generate new resolver. This will be the resolver for my login page. So that will be the place where I factually get an information about the cookie and about if the user is remembered, and where the authorization service will be called or not. So once we are trying to render this view on this server side, it should go to this one and pass the remembered token, take the token from the cookie and pass the ID of the request to the component, so component will know what ID call the authorization service to ask for the status of authorization. So the next thing which we have for now is to add this resolver which we just added to the application routing. So I need to import it, of course. And once I have this resolver imported, I'm going to change the path entry for the login. and use this resolver with it. So finally, we can go to the login page component, add one method here. Oh, sorry. Okay, the changes which happens here, it's the new method appeared, which is called handle second factor. The reason that this method appeared is that we just have this in two places right now. The one place where we can handle the second factor is the ng on init. So whenever user is remembered and the token is passed with the route resolver, I got it in my router snapshot, I am handling the second factor here. Or if user is not remembered, this is the first time that user is visiting the application, using it, or he don't want to be remembered, we are also handling the second factor for the user. So this is why this method appeared. It's just the code which we had previously. The last thing which we need to change, or we can change, are the small refactor in the authorization service. And what we will have here, so what I'm going to do here is just add the import statements, and I'm going to change the way the second factor method is working. If you remember the first part, you are familiar with the timer. If you will pass the two parameters to the timer, it will just create the observable, which is not emitting once, but it's emitting after given amount of time, couple times. So every 1 second, this is going to emit the value, and once the value will be emitted, we are going to call the poll status method, which is checking the status of the second factor authorization. We just need to add this method here. So it's calling our backend using the token which we have from the Twilio, from the Authy, from the second factor provider. Let's check if all of that works. So recompile again and run server again. And what we are expecting right now, we have no cookies already. So what we will need to do is to authenticate, click the checkbox. I will get the token once. And after, I'm going to remove the cookie, which is saying that I am authenticated. So once I will refresh the application, I should be placed on the login page again, but I should have information immediately that we are waiting for the second factor. It shouldn't be necessary for me to pass the credentials, and also I should get the second factor on my mobile. We are running, so we can navigate to localhost. So now I'm going to indicate the situation when I am remembered and I don't have the cookie which is saying that I am authenticated. So let me navigate to the application one more time. And immediately, without typing anything, we are waiting for second factor. All of that is made on the backend. The idea was to show you that Node.js can run this, what you can see here. Probably I introduced some typo with passing the UID or something like that. So that's the part second. That's all from my side. If you have any questions to this part or the first, that's the best moment. And that would be the reasonable thing because it's raining outside. Oh no, I have one more thing for you. I'm sorry, because what I have is the yet another link and yet another QR code. So we done that, and you can of course follow this online. And the use case here, it's working for sure. And this is where you can find the article. I would like to ask you all for the feedback. I would really appreciate that. There is a link to the form. It should not take you more than 2 minutes to fill it up. It's just a couple questions like, did you like that? Did you like another thing? And one open question. Anything is not required, so you can also submit the empty form. And the last thing is that I'm still Maciej Treder, and you can still find me here. And this is the QR code where my website is embedded, my homepage. And my homepage is super simple, it's just containing the links to all of that social networks. Thank you.